Hi everybody, and welcome to this special presentation from the Liptember Foundation and Transitioning Well. I'm your host, my name's Louise Browne, and I'm the Head of Public Health and Education at Bri Hayllar. So today we're going to be talking about anxiety. This is something that people have had for the first time over the last couple of years with the pandemic. So today we're going to talk to a psychologist to try and unpack what anxiety feels like and what are some of the things that we can do about it. So welcome, Bri. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to start with probably what sounds like a really basic question, but we know this is something that women Google all the time. What does anxiety feel like?
What does it feel like? It's going to feel different for everybody, but there are some common experiences, and I like to get people to think about it as showing up in 4 different ways. So the experience of anxiety is going to show up in our body, so how we feel in our body. It's going to show up in our thinking, what's going on in our thoughts, in our mind. It's going to show up emotionally in how we're feeling in emotions. And it's also going to show up in our behaviours. So that might be things that we're doing or maybe things that we're not doing.
Yeah, there's so many things going on there. So could you break those down for us?
Yeah, so in our body, we might feel some of those things that I just mentioned before. So maybe a racing heart. Our breath rate's probably going to speed up a bit and be a bit shallow in our breathing. Muscle tension is likely to show up. Some agitation in our body. We might feel a bit restless, a bit fidgety. That's because we've got a lot of chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol that are floating around.
So that's that fight and flight response?
Yes, there's a lot of similarity there with the stress response in what's happening in our bodies during anxiety. Yeah, definitely. So I can see that you've picked up that similarity there and why they can easily get confused. So so that's some of the physical responses that we might feel. We might feel a bit sick in the tummy. We might feel flushed or sweating. So in terms of how anxiety feels in our body, that's what we might notice. In our thinking, we're probably going to be pretty preoccupied, pretty kind of stuck on worries. We're going to be possibly circling around the same sort of worries, concerns, fears. We might even be sort of catastrophizing. That's where we tend to make our thinking, our worries much bigger than they really are. In terms of emotions, obviously worry, anxiety, they're the big ones there, but we may also feel fear. So the phobias, that's an anxiety disorder. So we might feel a really strong fear response. We may feel irritable or easily sort of triggered into anger. So those are the emotions. And in terms of how we behave, that's the other component there. Everyone's going to be different. Okay, so it's going to look different in terms of what we do, but what tends to sit underneath that is going to be what we call avoidance behaviour. So what that means is that we're trying to get away from those feelings of anxiety, of worry. And so that might mean that we start pulling back from certain activities or tasks.
So not wanting to go out and meet with other people.
Yeah. Exactly, certain places, certain people. So as I said, it'll look really different for everybody, but often what sits underneath it is just wanting to avoid, to get away from certain things that feel like they're triggering that feeling. So everybody's really different though in how that will come together. Some people will get more of the thinking, some people more of the physical bodily sensations. Everyone's really different.
Yeah, so a different experience for different people.
Exactly.
And I think the things that get lumped together is often stress, anxiety and depression. So maybe you could tell us some of the key differences between those 3 things, because people do tend to talk about them and maybe get them confused.
Yeah. There's lots of confusion. I hear people all the time sort of just lumping them all in together. And there's really good reasons why we do that. So if we start first of all by looking at stress and anxiety, we already just talked about fight, flight, and that's that stress response. So human bodies, we're amazing human beings. So we have this inbuilt mechanism to allow us to rise to challenges and to deal with things that are threatening us. And that's our stress response, our fight-flight response. So that's a whole lot of different systems in our body, really all rallying a whole lot of energy and resources for us to, you know, if we've got a challenge, for example, we might have a whole lot of work we have to get done by 5 o'clock. That stress response is going to equip us. It's going to fill us full of energy to be able to get that work done. If we have to run away from a lion, not a very common experience, of course, but if that sort of threat occurs, we're going to need to get away from that. So that stress response, we might feel things like pounding heart, rapid breath, muscle tension, a bit sick in the tummy, sweating. And these are all of the systems getting us ready, filling us full of oxygenated blood, giving us adrenaline and cortisol. They're very energizing chemicals.
What we really
There's no
need.
point in, yeah, exactly. And there's no point in digesting our lunch if we're about to be somebody else's lunch. And so it moves all the blood away from things like digestion, which is why we can sometimes get that feeling in our belly. So if you see that comparison between how I described anxiety in our body and the stress response, we can see why it's so easy to confuse the two. But really the thinking is what's different with anxiety. So in anxiety, we get stuck thinking around those worries. So at the end of the workday, you've got all that work done, the stress is gone, but then our mind might be circling around on, did I do it right? And did I miss something? And so that challenge in being able to let go of that thinking, that's where the anxiety is starting to show rather than the stress. The stress or the thing that's triggering the stress, that's gone. But the persisting thinking about it, that's the anxiety.
Thinking ahead, thinking about what's going to happen or what might happen. Okay.
Or what did happen.
And depression is different again.
Yeah, depression. Different. Depression is a mood disorder. But I think the reason that people get them quite confused or talk about them, I guess, interchangeably is because it's actually quite common to have a diagnosis of both at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we just bundle all those symptoms in together. So if we think about just a really quick sort of snapshot of what depression might be, again, we can use that idea, those 4 ways of showing up. In our body, depression might feel like sort of really low energy. Everything feels really effortful. We're really tired, maybe having trouble sleeping, maybe not eating well, either not eating enough or eating too much.
Finding it hard to get motivated.
Yeah, exactly. So in our body, we're feeling like that. Emotionally, sad. We might also be feeling things like guilt or shame. We might be feeling pretty hopeless or not very motivated, low confidence. Or you know what, sometimes we might even just feel really checked out emotionally altogether, really just quite flat.
So Bri, is there a tipping point when someone should recognise that they need to get help? Like how would they know that point?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that I would say is you know you. We all know ourselves. So when we know that we are just responding in a way that's just not ourselves, and there's a couple of flags that we can think about. So first of all, if you're feeling, though, that experience of anxiety and there doesn't really seem to be any reason for it, it's just sort of coming out of nowhere, there's no trigger for it, that's a bit of a flag that it's maybe hit a tipping point. It could also be just how long it's going on for. So if you're really getting stuck on something for weeks after it's happened, then, you know, we want to go in and get that checked out. Another big one is just what we would say is functioning. So have a look at how well you're functioning in your life. And if those feelings of anxiety are actually making it really hard for you to just go about your day-to-day life, your work, look after yourself, you know, connect with the people in your life, if the anxiety feelings are making that hard for you to function, those would be some of those tipping points that I would say, go and get that checked out. We're really good at getting physical things checked out.
That's right.
If I wake up in the morning and my feet are really itchy and my toenails have all turned green, I would rush myself off and get that checked out, right? But often with our signs and symptoms of a change in our mental health, we're often not as quick to go and get that checked out. So if you're feeling irritable for no good reason, if you're really stuck on your worries and your thoughts, and if it's going on for a long time and it's causing trouble in your life, go and get it checked out, definitely.
Yeah, we're not always good at reading those signs within ourselves, are we? So sometimes it might be someone that we know that actually points that out to us before we go, oh yeah, actually I think you're right. So we know, Bri, that women experience anxiety perhaps more than men, or maybe they pick it up more than men do. But are there certain times in women's lives where anxiety is more common?
Yeah, we do know that about 1 in 4 people will experience anxiety in their lifetime, and it's slightly higher prevalence for women. Look, there are potentially different stages of our life for women where we may experience, or we may be more prone to experiencing anxiety. Of course, I would say it's not necessarily the case that it's going to happen. But a few times we want to be on the lookout for when there's sort of shifts in our hormones that might make us a little bit more prone. So when we're adolescents, teenagers, that might be a time where we see that shift. With perimenopause and menopause, we may notice that shift, and of course with pregnancy. And I think that really ties up with often those events too are at big transition points in our life.
Big life changes.
Yeah, yep. And so that itself, even without the hormones, can mean that we might be a little bit more triggered to experience anxiety at those times. So it could be those big things like having a baby, or maybe when those babies grow up and move out and it moves us into a different life stage. It could also be just big life changes that could occur for anyone. And I think the key here is that whenever we experience a big life change that was unwanted or unexpected, that can sometimes make it more challenging to deal with. Of course, like a job loss or a global pandemic, all of those things.
We know those numbers have gone sky high over this time, don't we?
Yep,
and I think at Jean Hales, menopause is one of our kind of key areas, and we hear from women a lot that they haven't had these problems before, but around the time of menopause, things do, get a little crazy for women, and people start to worry that it's them, and it's never happened to them before, but we certainly know that menopause is, as you say, one of those key times.
Yeah, and I would say that just because we know that those times in our life might trigger it, doesn't mean we should accept it. We should definitely still get out there and take steps to manage it and get our mental health back on track.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing, isn't there? That there's things that can be done. So what can people do, Bri, when they're experiencing some of these kind of feelings and behaviours that you've talked about?
Yeah, there are definitely things that people can do. Anxiety is very treatable and very manageable. And in fact, self-management is a really critical part of the process. People feeling like they've got a toolkit of strategies that they can reach for when those anxiety signs show up. No one wants to feel powerless when they feel like that. So we want to be able to say, I've got a great strategy to manage that. So a couple of little things that we can do for ourselves might be to look at our breathing. So obviously we're all always breathing. When we're talking about anxiety, what we want to think about is slowing down, deliberately slowing down our breath. And what that's doing is it's activating our relaxation response. So lots of quick little ways we can slow the breath down. Counting the breath can be a nice one. It just gives your brain something else to focus on for a second. So even just counting in for 3, maybe out for 4, that longer out breath can sometimes trigger into that relaxation response quite nicely. Another nice one we can do is relax our muscles. And I think it's important to have other strategies other than just the breath, because sometimes when people feel anxiety, they actually don't really want to focus on their breath. It actually makes them feel like it's making the anxiety feelings bigger. So good to have ones that aren't about the breath. So just noticing tension in our body. We do tend to hold tension in a couple of common areas. So I always encourage people to notice. Do you hold it in your shoulders, your neck? Clenching fists is another one, or the jaw. So even just noticing those places and just relaxing them, even or maybe tensing them up first, just to notice the tension, then relax them so you can feel that difference. That can be a nice one. And it's a nice easy one for when you're at work or you're out and about. You can't always lie down and do a full body relaxation at those times, so nice to have a quick one.
So we need a little cheat sheet, right?
Yeah, sometimes I do encourage people, you know, in the thick of those anxiety feelings, it might be hard to think clearly about what do I need to do. So having them written down somewhere will be a good way to remind yourself, oh yeah, that's the thing I wanted to do to help
Jean
me.
Hales has just produced a little tip sheet for managing anxiety, so this is probably the perfect place to give that a plug.
Exactly.
But it has lots of things that we've just talked about on there. So it's a nice reminder, I think, just when you're in those. You're not going to pull it out in those moments, but it might be something that you look at, you know, now and then if you're experiencing anxiety regularly.
And so 2 others would be, we want to, if you're particularly prone to the thinking symptoms, so getting caught in thinking loops, we want to instruct our brain to focus somewhere else. So I like to think about this like a circuit breaker. So if we're really stuck in a thinking loop, give your brain something else to focus on. Now, anxiety thinking tends to be a lot about the future. Sometimes it's about the past, going over things. So a nice circuit breaker is to just bring yourself back into the here and now. And so what you can feel in a sensory way, what I can see, what I can hear, what I can feel, taste and touch, that's a nice sensory, just bring me back to the here and now.
So
it
that's
might be
a mindfulness?
We would call it a grounding exercise actually. So it's just grounding you in the here and now. What can I see? I can see a red couch. I can see a glass door. You're just asking your brain to really get caught in the detail of your experience. I can feel the chair underneath me. I can feel the ground under my feet. And that can really help us snap out of that thinking.
Yeah, that's a nice easy one. It doesn't matter where you are, you can do that.
Exactly, and some people even like to say maybe wear a bracelet or a watch, and that becomes their thing. They just trace around that. It just anchors them back in the here and now. The other one sounds so basic, is just looking after yourself, right? But what I know when people are struggling, if they feel like they're not coping, that's actually the stuff we stop doing. So I would really encourage everybody just to go back to those fundamentals, those basics, making sure you're getting enough sleep. It's so hard to keep our emotions stable if we haven't had enough sleep. So at least getting your 7 hours, and even if that feels too hard, even if you can just get another half hour, that's going to make a difference for you. We want to eat well, so fueling our body with nice stable energy. We don't want the highs and lows of sugar. And if you're someone who loves caffeine, maybe have a think about it, because caffeine is a stimulant. Activates our system. And if you're feeling anxiety, that's already activating your system. So that caffeine might just push you into overload. So have a think about maybe dialing that back a little bit.
I think some of those ideas are really great because I think lately especially, some of us might not have been doing all those good things for ourselves that we normally would over the last few years. I think that's probably been pretty common. So Bri, what about things like exercise? Could we hear that's really great, and connecting with your friends too?
Yeah, definitely the other pillars of wellbeing. So exercise is really good for anxiety because we're getting all of those energy chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol, and exercise can be a good way to flush those out and release that energy. And connecting with other people, when we have that great connection with other people, we release oxytocin, sometimes called the cuddle hormone, helps us bond and connect. But what it also does is it calms our system down. That's another great one to put into our toolkit.
Do you think it's important for people to tell others that they're experiencing anxiety?
Look, I would definitely say it's up to every individual to make that decision about whether they tell someone and who they tell. And there's been a lot of stigma around mental illness, so I can understand why people might feel reluctant. But as we said, 1 in 4 people will experience anxiety. Half of us will experience some sort of mental illness across our lifespan. So it's a really common experience. So I would encourage people to think about, is there someone you trust, someone you know is going to treat you with kindness and respect, that you might be able to reach out to, because getting support through this is actually part of the recovery, and they may be able to help you navigate some of the challenges of, you know, making appointments and getting yourself motivated to get help. So have a think if there's someone in your life who can help you with that.
Yeah, and just not feeling alone. So Bri, is fantastic information. So I think probably to finish with, you know, if you're experiencing anxiety that's affecting your life, your relationships, your work, then what's the next step? What happened? What should I do?
Yeah, look, there's lots of things that you can do to get the ball rolling. If you are listening to this right now, you've already taken that first step, because getting information, informing yourself, learning more about what you're experiencing is a great first step. It often helps people to feel less alone. Often I've spoken with people who feel such relief in understanding, oh, that's what I'm feeling, that's what I'm experiencing, it's got a name. So, and that might come from websites, it might come from apps or online resources. So that's a really good place to start.
Feeling like people have got some control over what's happening to them.
Yeah, because if this is the first time you've ever experienced it, people get really scared about what they're feeling. So learning a little bit more about it is really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. The next thing that I would suggest for people who are working is check out if your employer has an employee assistance program. So they're often called EAPs, and they are free confidential counselling offered through your employer. So a lot of people are often worried, are they really confidential? They are, and if you're not sure about that, give the employee assistance program a call and ask them to explain it. It's short, it's practical, and if you need ongoing support, they can help you to connect with ongoing support. Yep.
And we know at the moment, I think right across Australia, getting in to see a psychologist is not as easy as it sounds. So this would be a great first step, especially if you're in a big organisation that offers these kinds of programs.
Yeah, all sorts of organisations offer them. So yeah, definitely check it out. And you're right. So that EAP counsellor might be able to just keep you on track now while you're waiting to get into ongoing support.
Yep. Fantastic.
Yep. And so that would be the next thing is getting ongoing support. And really the best place to start for that is talking to your GP, and they'll be able to help you with a referral and talk you through that process.
Fantastic. There's so many things there. I think it's been a great insight for people into, you know, what they might be experiencing and where to go for help. And Jean Hales, the Jean Hales website, jeanhales.org.au, has an anxiety section. We have fact sheets and a few tips, as well as some explanation of what happens when you go to your GP. So hopefully that will be really useful. Thanks so much, Bri. You've provided some fantastic information for people today, so thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks so much for joining us today, and remember, for more information on anxiety in women, go to jeanhales.org.au.